Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are taking a look at one of history's most famous figures. When you think of Thomas Edison, you probably picture, a lone genius in a laboratory, suddenly struck by a brilliant idea, holding up a glowing light bulb, right? But the truth is actually far more complex, infinitely more calculated, and honestly a whole lot more fascinating.
Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. You've definitely heard this quote before. It's plastered on classroom walls and motivational posters literally everywhere. But today, we're going to see how Thomas Edison built a massive business empire entirely around this very concept. For Edison, perspiration wasn't just a cute metaphor for working hard. It was a rigorous, systematic, and highly industrialized method of trial and error.
So, let's dive right in by challenging a fundamental assumption. What was his greatest creation? If I asked you right now, you'd probably say the light bulb, right? Or the phonograph, or maybe the motion picture camera. And while those were absolutely world-changing, they were actually just the byproducts of his true masterpiece. He held a staggering 1,093 U.S. patents in his lifetime. Think about that number for a second. But his greatest invention wasn't a single physical device. It was the modern industrialized process of inventing itself. Edison essentially figured out how to manufacture innovation on a strict schedule.
Section 1. The Wizard of Menlo Park.
Just look at the sheer, baffling variety of materials tested at his New Jersey facility, which was basically the birthplace of the modern tech campus. His lab kept a stock of almost every conceivable material on Earth, so his teams could test absolutely everything. We're talking about 8,000 kinds of chemicals, tortoise shells, ostrich feathers, and yes, even the hair of humans, hogs, and cows. Why? Because if you're going to find the exact material that makes a product work, you have to systematically test the entire world until you find it.
And this brings us to what Menlo Park truly was, an industrial research laboratory. Edison wasn't a lone wizard at all. He was a fiercely demanding manager. He pioneered this type of facility where organized science and massive teamwork were applied to create commercial technology. He drove hundreds of employees to the absolute limits of human exhaustion to churn out patents, demanding they work extreme hours, often 18 hours a day, right alongside him.
Section 2. Mastering Sound and Light. In 1877, his team developed the phonograph, which initially recorded sound onto a grooved tinfoil cylinder. Now, the concept of capturing and replaying the human voice was so wildly unexpected by the public that it seemed like actual magic. There's just no other way to describe it. This is what cemented his reputation as the Wizard of Menlo Park and made him a massive global celebrity. And this brilliantly illustrates that perspiration method in action. Creating a commercially viable light bulb filament wasn't a sudden flash of genius. It was a brutal, exhaustive process of elimination. First, they tried carbonized cardboard. Well, that burned out way too fast. Then they moved to testing various grasses and canes like hemp and palmetto. Finally, after immense trial and error, they settled on carbonized bamboo, which they found could burn for over 1,200 hours. It was a total victory of pure persistence over pure inspiration.
Section 3. The War of the Currents. But as his empire grew, so did the cutthroat competition, leading to a massive corporate battle that would literally redefine the power grid of the entire world. See, Edison had heavily invested in direct current, or DC. It was low voltage and relatively safe, but it had a fatal flaw. It couldn't reliably travel farther than a mile from the power plant. So it was great for dense cities, but terrible for reaching rural America. Enter George Westinghouse and alternating current, or AC, which could be stepped up to high voltages to travel vast distances. Edison, however, stubbornly refused to adapt. He viewed AC as inherently dangerous and a direct threat to his established DC patents.
To fight back, Edison resorted to a severe propaganda and smear campaign. Leveraging public fears, he actually aided in the public electrocution of animals with AC power to paint his rival system as lethal. It's pretty wild. But despite all that fear-mongering, the economics of AC were simply vastly superior. Edison ended up bleeding cash through patent battles, he lost majority control of his own company, and in 1892, financier J.P. Morgan engineered a merger with an AC competitor to form General Electric. This maneuver essentially left Edison marginalized from the very lighting empire he created.
Section 4. Massive Failures and Movie Magic.
Stripped of his lighting monopoly, Edison pivoted. And it's here we see spectacular failures right alongside accidental masterpieces, all born from his relentless need to keep inventing. For example, he dumped a vast fortune into an automated iron ore mine in New Jersey.
The idea was to pulverize massive boulders and use giant arrays of electromagnets to pull out low-grade iron. Well, it failed spectacularly, losing him millions and pushing him to the brink of bankruptcy during the 1893 recession. But, brilliantly, he recouped his losses by making an incredible pivot. He took the giant horizontal kilns and rock-crushing machinery from the failed mine and applied them to completely revolutionize Portland's cement manufacturing. He saved his finances, licensed the technology, and even attempted to cast entire concrete homes in single molds.
Now, while Edison was distracted by that failing mining venture, his team, heavily led by his employee William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, developed the kinetograph camera. This invention spawned a movie studio that eventually churned out nearly 1,200 early silent films, ranging from acrobats and parades all the way to the very first Frankenstein film in 1910.
However, his cinematic empire eventually declined, largely because he treated movies as purely mechanical rather than a storytelling art form. When sound was finally integrated into film, creating talkies, Edison absolutely hated it. He blamed the new technology for ruining the visual acting, offering a uniquely personal critique. He claimed he could sense the bad acting better than anyone precisely because he was deaf.
Section 5. The man behind the myth.
To wrap up, let's examine the deeply complex, often contradictory man who actually ran this corporate machine. Edison was almost entirely deaf, which was the result of a childhood illness. But instead of viewing this as a disability, he saw it as a superpower. He believed it allowed him to completely block out the distractions of the world and achieve total concentration. In fact, to evaluate the audio quality of his phonographs, he would literally clamp his teeth into the wood of the piano or music player to absorb the sound waves through his skull directly into his inner ear. How crazy is that?
But the public image of the grandfatherly inventor hides a much darker and more eccentric reality. He was an intensely controlling man who essentially lived in his laboratory, deeply neglecting his wives, Mary and Mina, and his children. His son, Thomas Jr., struggled so much in his shadow that he resorted to selling fraudulent snake oil products, using the Edison name until his father actually took him to court. And as for his eccentricities, well, because of his deafness, he loved the loud boom of explosions, incredibly often sneaking actual TNT into the family's 4th of July fireworks.
Philosophically, he was a lifelong freethinker, heavily influenced by the writings of Thomas Paine. He firmly rejected traditional religion and the concept of an immortal soul. Instead, he viewed nature as completely indifferent, describing himself not as a divine creation, but merely as a biological machine, an aggregate of cells functioning together, much like an industrial city.
Which brings us to our final thought. As you reflect on the thousands of plant samples, the burned-out bamboo fibers, the smear campaigns, and the relentless drive of the Menlo Park factory, ask yourself, was Thomas Edison's true genius in the individual gadgets he sold? Or was his ultimate legacy the industrial blueprint he left behind, the very framework that modern tech companies still use today to manufacture the future? Thank you for checking out this explainer, and we'll see you next time.